Crypto's not quite money yet at the moment. It's a lot of digital assets. And I think that's an extremely healthy sign that we still have the capacity to achieve financial evolution. It's obvious that the fiat system is reaching some kind of critical threshold. Massively rapid monetary growth, the explicit financing of government deficits that are running in trillions of dollars every year as far as the eye can see, you sense that the existing system is going to be driven to breaking point. And it's lucky that some kind of alternative ecosystem is evolving. And I'll give you a historical analogy, Joe. This was what it was like in the days of the Habsburg Empire, when a debased coinage, this was the great inflation of the 16th and 17th century, ceased to be useful really in the realm of trade. What did merchants do in the early modern period? They used bills of exchange. Now, bills of exchange to finance trade were bits of paper. They were authenticated by merchant signatures. It was a decentralized financial system. The state was not involved, and it was the key to the first phase of globalization.
Was there must have been a lot of fraud if people were doing this?
Well, of course, the trouble with any new system is that it's volatile because it's experimental, and it has security gaps, which are obviously going to be exploited.
But they made it stable enough to work.
Ultimately, bills of exchange became the basis of international trade finance right through the 18th, 19th, and into the 20th century. And people forget when they say there's something new about decentralized finance. No, the original decentralized finance was the basis of the expansion of global trade that was absolutely crucial to the Industrial Revolution. So in some ways, I think of Bitcoin particularly, but crypto and decentralized finance generally, as a new tech-enabled version of that stateless monetary system that evolved to finance trade. It's interesting because although income distribution has clearly widened to the point that it's reminiscent of the 1920s, wealth distribution has not got as unequal as it was in the 19th century. Still, I think there are things that we can learn.
So 19th century is much, much more unequal.
It is, yeah. I mean, because there really are a very large proportion of people with nothing at all. I mean, with grinding poverty that we can barely imagine. So we have moved into a different world in which significant amounts of redistribution are being done, but also people have some capital at a much lower level of the distribution. But what's interesting when you look back at the 19th century is the role that this extraordinarily wealthy family, who made their money from nothing, started in the ghetto of Frankfurt in the late 18th century. Once they had become what they were, which was really the gatekeepers of the international bond market, they were not content with mere wealth. And I'm fascinated, it was one of the things that motivated me to write the book, by the extraordinarily creative way that the Rothschilds engaged in philanthropy. They did an immense amount to promote the cause of Jewish emancipation. Mm-hmm. They thought of themselves as kind of informally the Jewish royal family. Yep. And this was an enormously important achievement at a time when Jews had very, very limited rights and were subject to all kinds of discrimination.
So they did a lot of work to help Jews get more rights in different countries.
That's right. But they also did a great deal of philanthropic work that was general and therefore available to the non-Jewish community. So I think the lesson when I look back on that book is, first of all, they're part of a massive financial network that's absolutely crucial to making a global economy possible and spreading industrial technology to the wider world.
Yeah, their information networks back then were pretty impressive. Yeah.
Absolutely. It was one of the keys to their success. But their real historical significance is not just that they made a lot of money. It's the fact that once they'd done that, they had a very powerful sense of social responsibility and vision. They had a vision of a society in which Jews were no longer a despised minority, but were fully fledged members of society who could take their seats in the House of Commons in London, who could enjoy true civil rights. So people sometimes forget that the Jews had to have this fight for civil rights in the 19th century. This was an amazing achievement, considering that the Jews had been expelled entirely from England in the Middle Ages. By the mid-19th century, Lionel de Rothschild can take his seat as a member of Parliament in the House of Commons and is able to insist that he does not take his oath as a member of Parliament on the New Testament.
Is this the same guy who also had the zebras pulling his carriage?
No, that's a later member of the Rothschild family.
Okay,
they also got into zoology. But actually, the next generation of Rothschilds, there's a Rothschild in the House of Lords. Yep. This is a really important story that we sometimes forget. I mean, one notices these days hostility to Jews and a tendency to treat Jews as if they were never at any point a discriminated against minority. Well, reading my history of the Rothschilds will remind you of just how long a road it was from the Frankfurt ghetto to that.
I want to hear a little bit more from you about like what's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years? Are you optimistic in 2050 we'll have a totally different set of problems than we have now, or are some of these trends things we're going to be dealing with for quite a long time?
I'm an optimist in the sense that I chose to come to the United States. I wasn't just born here, and I still think that the prospects are brighter here than most native-born Americans realize. The United States has a bunch of secret sauces. It has a unique operating system politically that, despite those who predicted Weimar America, withstood the upheavals of the last few years just as the founders intended. So I'm an optimist about the political system continuing to function.
So we're 30 times wealthier than we were 200 years ago for the median person. Is it going to be... Are they going to be like that again? Is the future 100, 200 years from now just completely different and positive and brighter? Are we
potentially? I mean, remember, there are all kinds of things that we still have to exploit in the realm of technology, and particularly biotechnology. If mRNA vaccines were the key to defeating COVID, which I think they were, there's a whole lot more that technology still has to do. My sense is that there are still many more extraordinary breakthroughs to come. And those who say, no, we've reached a plateau, it's probably the beginning of decline, it's going to be stagnation, our grandchildren will be worse off than us, I think they're getting it wrong. And of course, people were saying exactly those things at the beginning of the 19th century, massively underestimating the impact of technological change in every domain. Because remember, technological change changes everything. It changes food supply, it changes medical care. It doesn't just produce cheap shirts or cheap widescreen TVs. So I remain an optimist that we still have a lot more. It may be slightly higher hanging fruit, but a lot more fruit to harvest from science and the application of science to the problems that we confront as a species.
Do you think there's going to be competition in government around and outside of the U.S.? Because, you know, a lot of people for the first time are moving out of California, out of New York. Obviously, people always have done this, but recently it's been a huge wave in the last couple of years. And are people going to be going to charter cities and free cities? Are there new countries going to evolve? Are things like that likely in the coming years, or is that silly?
I think the federal system will continue to do what it says on the
Federal
tin,
system
give
will.
people choices. Yeah. I think outside the United States, it is much harder than some of my more radical libertarian friends imagine to create a new state. Small states are very vulnerable. That's one of the lessons of history. It's big empires that call the shots, and you're only a viable city-state as long as the big empires are happy for you to be one. Ask Singapore. So my sense is that the most important competition politically is actually within a decentralized system like the United States.
Well, that's what with our sister Institute, we're working in 8 states to pass laws right now. That's my bias as well. As you fix the different states, you teach them
it's one of the keys to the superiority of the American system over the more centralized states that we see in the rest of the world, not least in China, which, although we are told again and again is the power of the future, the rising power, suffers from the chronic pathologies of excessive centralization and lack of any accountability through a free press or the rule of law. My sense, this is one of the reasons I'm an American optimist, is that just as with the Soviet Union, most conventional wisdom exaggerates the strength of the Chinese system, is taken in by the propaganda, and doesn't see the rot within. My optimism tells me that the Chinese system is in much bigger trouble than most people in the West realize. And the reason for that is that it is inherently impossible for one man at the head of one party to run such a large proportion of humanity with the ideology of Marxism-Leninism, even if it is tempered by
He's
some
not really a
forces.
Marxist-Leninist, is he? Isn't he like some kind of fascist capitalist?
Well, I actually think that Marxism-Leninism is much more important to Xi Jinping than most Western observers realize. I mean, they are still reading Marx and Engels on the Politburo Standing Committee. Was explained to me recently by the head of research of the party in Beijing. And Xi is much more ideological than I think is realized in the West, because people hear his speeches for Western audiences at Davos, but they don't actually hear what Xi is saying in Chinese to Communist Party cadres. And when one looks closely, in fact, Xi Jinping has turned the clock back ideologically and is dialing back the room for maneuver of the market elements in the Chinese system.